The next speaker we have today is Mr. Murtaza Khan. Murtaza is the regional managing partner at Fragomen for Middle East and Africa region. Fragomen is the global leader in immigration services and solutions. Murtaza has been based in the Middle East for the past 14 years and is responsible for Fragomen's practices and network partners spanning across the Middle East and Africa region. In this capacity, he has extensive experience of working with large global and regional companies alongside the small and medium enterprise sector. He has deep knowledge of regional business, immigration, mobility, and deployment issues. Murtaza is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and he has worked in the corporate and audit finance advisory divisions at in one of the big four. Being an expert in business migration across the region, he has spoken at numerous global and regional events. He has also published several articles expressing thought leadership on the subject of migration. As a representative of the GFMD business mechanism, he has advised and provided input at the intergovernmental process facilitated by the United Nations in adopting the Global Compact on Migration in 2018. He continues to represent the private sector at the Global Forum on Migration and Development and has consistently been providing input at various regional consultative processes, including the Abu Dhabi Dialogue and the African Union. Over to you, Murtaza.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Dado. I'd like to just start by appreciating and thanking the preceding speakers for some highly insightful comments and some of the data shared by Isabel and the approaches, the innovative approaches of the organization. And some excellent comments by both Golda and Marie in relation to partnering with the private sector and business. And before I really go into some of the COVID specific situation and measures and policies adopted, I just want to take a little step back because it's important that we do continue on the basis of partnering closely as business. I do sit on the GFMD business mechanism and represent a number of interests around businesses with regards to migration issues around the world, and specifically in the Middle East and Africa region, which is my core focus. And of course, having been based here for quite some time, I can relate to a lot of the issues. So just to take that quick segue into what we've framed at the business mechanism as the position on migration vis-a-vis responsible recruitment and fair and ethical practices, which are really core which form a core pillar of the asks of the business mechanism at government level or at reform level when it comes to international mobility issues. So there's a clear recognition that companies need to attract skills and talent that might not be available in the local markets from overseas. And at the same time, this international labor mobility affords opportunities to foreign workers that they may not come across in their home countries. And the first point of entry really is the recruitment process. We've always held that special attention does need to be given in that part of the process, where companies that are recruiting abroad the recruitment agencies that they're using, and that they support their clients to find the right talent, that they should ensure transparency in labor supply chain and ensure that all recruitment activities are performed in accordance with ethical principles and local best practice regulation that sits beyond local legislation as well. And many mechanisms have been discussed, and I was very interested to hear about the Verite system that Marie spoke about as well in that regard. So the risks when it comes to human and labor rights violations, which obviously have implications for the protection and welfare of recruited workers, as well as they have an implication for the reputation of companies and employment agencies that are involved. So it's really fundamentally important to differentiate between the various ethical and compliant players from the rogue recruitment agencies and employers that make a profit at the expense of the fundamental rights of workers. And I think that has already been borne out from the discussion that there are points made by Isabel in relation to some of the lateral thinking and approaching parent companies or franchise owners in the hotel industry has actually yielded results and actual investigations, which truly showcases that there are companies that are willing to go above and beyond local legislation and implement strong standards. So compliance with the law is a primary duty of all enterprises. This is a clear position that is held by the private sector constituency that we represent. And non-compliance risks to companies themselves often result in huge administrative and legal costs, as well as reputational damage that can destroy a brand. So avoiding this damage is quite essential to companies where in the world we live in, news spreads in a matter of seconds. And companies have a recognition that reputation is really hard to build, but probably can be destroyed in less than 5 minutes. So that's where part of the responsibility for ethical, fair, and compliant recruitment also actually brings in real incentives and advantages to companies themselves, and in a way considered good practice for business itself. And clients and business partners are increasingly demanding from their supply chains to adhere to higher standards than local legislation. So if we see procurement processes where certain standards around labor rights or migrant rights are actually a part of a particular procurement process in companies that are bidding for a project. And those are again some good best practices that we have been promoting and discussing at the business mechanism level. So in addition to other standards, like standards and principles developed by the World Employment Confederation in their code of conduct, or there are many initiatives, some of them led by the organizations that are on the panel today as well, that promote fair and ethical recruitment. And notwithstanding all of these, business has always the responsibility and duty to respect workers' rights. Throughout the recruitment process, companies, having said this, companies alone cannot solve the problem of unscrupulous recruitment practices. And they need governments to adopt and enforce the right legal and regulatory framework. For example, too many countries lack effective frameworks to really set the ground rules on who can operate as a recruitment agency and under what conditions they can set up or continue to operate, and what kind of monitoring goes into that process as well on an ongoing basis. And the landscape becomes even more complex when the recruitment process involves multiple countries with sub-agencies and subcontractors at a local, regional, or subsector within a country as well. So for this reason, actions that governments take are essential to certainly address the legal gaps or practices that have become embedded in certain local cultures. At the same time, sometimes local or national regulation is there, but implementation is often too ineffective or counterproductive. And this can then result in increasingly burdensome requirements placed on recruitment companies, while at the same time not really focusing on the core issues and non-compliant actors who may find loopholes. So in sum, by committing to ethical recruitment principles, participating in multi-stakeholder initiatives, and really advocating for appropriate national legislation and regulations, companies can demonstrate their commitment and adherence with legislation governing recruitment of foreign workers. So, with that background and position statement, I wanted to just move to the current context of the impact of COVID-19 on businesses and economies. More specifically in the Middle East region, I can speak at. And we've seen data from the World Bank in this regard, and the data keeps coming, and each time there's a downward revision, unfortunately. Things like global GDP impacts being global GDP contracting by over 5%, and in the Middle East by over 4% over the course of the year. Governments have taken necessary measures to control the pandemic, which started with travel and border closures and went as far as total countrywide lockdowns and curfews. Restrictions on travel and tourism have caused this severe devastation in the aviation, travel, tourism, and hospitality industries. The resultant fall we've seen in energy and commodity prices, which has impacted the oil and gas industry significantly. And that alone in the oil and gas industry, which is such a cornerstone industry in this region, will likely result in a reduction in capital expenditure on new projects, which was originally planned by around 20% as the minimum level. The ILO has pointed out there's been an overall drop in the number of working hours across the Arab states of over 13%. That's the equivalent of their estimate of essentially job losses in another measure, if you like. And employers have obviously had to respond to the pandemic, and they have done so in many different ways. So the companies that were able to immediately move to a working from home structure or remote working arrangements have immediately done so through the modern tools that are available to us, and in terms of digital connectivity. Many companies, for instance, in the technology sector, who've been very successful with maintaining business continuity, partially due to existing remote working policies, but also due to the way their business models are set up. They've gone on to maintain their staffing levels without any impact on salaries or benefits for their employees. On the other hand, sectors that have been harder hit have had to institute policies ranging from hiring freezes to furloughs or reduction in working hours, reduction in pay and layoffs in certain industries as well. And there are also industries that are facing longer term structural implications or change or disruption to the way they operate. And of course, that will have longer term ramifications and vis-a-vis their own business model. So those are being looked at as well. Now, so there was a discussion on how transitional justice is important, and certainly certain countries have put into place COVID-related legislation, such as the UAE, in terms of a resolution that has allowed for companies to take certain measures as a result of the impact on business, and whether those measures include, mandating annual leave, paid or unpaid, reduction in salaries, or ultimately for companies faced by significant losses to make provisions for layoffs. Although they have communicated within the context and framework of the resolution some very specific benefits as well, and requirement for compliance with ensuring that existing laws and policies around gratuity or end of service benefits are fully adhered to. Things like health insurance are continually provided until the workers remain in the country. Accommodation arrangements to be continually provided until they remain in the country as well. Of course, flight restrictions and travel restrictions haven't allowed for people to be repatriated on a timely basis. And that's, a bilateral issue that the countries have been looking at on almost a case-to-case basis. But some very interesting measures that also have come out with the UAE and Bahrain, who've instituted somewhat of a virtual labor market. So for companies who were unable to pay their workers, for them to place them on the on the respective ministries' database for them almost to have a first right of recruitment, or almost review at a level where employers are looking to staff. Now, on an immediate basis, you may think that may not be very helpful in a market where hiring or recruitment is not happening, or where if a worker is in a certain industry, there's an industry-wide impact, so there's unlikely to be a job available. But where it's interesting is Bahrain, for instance, has made it as part of the availability for local Bahraini workers as well as foreign workers to go on the LMRA's database, to mandate employers to screen through that database at first before they would be able to bring another worker in from a foreign jurisdiction. So some really, I would say, good or innovative attempts at trying to create opportunities for the migrant workers that are already there in a particular country. What's also been borne out is the lack of a safety net or social security mechanisms in the event of such an economic crisis. I think in many countries around Europe and in North America, the governments have also stepped in to subsidize wages of workers. That has not been the case in our region, and things like I think it was also referenced, payment of gratuities has become an issue, where gratuity is legislatively in this region accounted for within the books of a company, as opposed to being put away in an external third-party pension fund, for instance. Although having said that, in the UAE, the DIFC initiated at the beginning of the year a contribution scheme in lieu of the end of service gratuity. So from January or February, I believe, onwards, all of the companies operating within the jurisdiction of the Dubai's financial center have had to actually pay the gratuity into a third-party managed pension fund, if you like. which is then directly accessible to the workers. So it's the start of something or a new practice that has been put into place, but one that certainly as a result of the pandemic could be a big learning factor to take into account in other countries and other jurisdictions, and thereby protecting the gratuities of both local and foreign workers in that context. The other thing that was interesting, and this is something the UAE implemented last year, was a replacement of just to give context, in the past, for every foreign workers, companies had to put down a fixed deposit with the Ministry of Labor. And they replaced that fixed deposit with an insurance scheme for which you'd pay a nominal amount. But on the back end of the insurance policy, that can cover costs of up to 20,000 dirhams, which relates to returning repatriation costs or unpaid wages or end of service gratuities in the event that contributes towards that could be a policy that could now be utilized. There is an issue potentially in terms of awareness levels and the ability to actually access and draw on those, but these are some interesting and innovative things that I wanted to put forth to contribute to the dialogue and discussion, and particularly when we talk about what are the suggestions or best practices that could be brought forth. Marie also referenced that many Fortune 500 brands take a responsible approach to their employment policies far beyond local legislation, which certainly resonates within our constituency as well. And there is a leverage to also look at how those employers are in a way rewarded through the legislation process, but also from a best practice sharing perspective. Some of the lesser experienced businesses or in the small and medium-sized sector, they could benefit from such sharing of best practices. Grievance mechanisms were raised earlier, and the issue of I think Isabel raised the issue of fear of reprisals for whistleblowers, and certainly a lot of companies follow very comprehensive policies around how they ensure the protection of whistleblowers or internal reporting mechanisms that allow for non-disclosure to be in place in the event of complaints and grievances being raised at an internal organizational level, and to try and seek to make those part and parcel of things like sponsorship obligations that attach to companies around the world. And one other interesting point I wanted to raise from what Marie mentioned is that investor groups are often a great source of leverage. And Isabel also talked about approaching investor groups. And I fully agree with that in the sense of global investors in terms of big equity firms or powerhouses in the pensions businesses. These are highly regulated businesses, and part of the obligations that they're starting to look at are to what extent the investments they're making also follow responsible guidelines, whether it relates to the SDGs or specific areas of the SDGs, which include fair and ethical recruitment practices, allowing for equal opportunities, employment opportunities, non-discrimination, etc. So these are a great source of leverage as well. If you look at it in terms of scaling that concept and adoption of the highest principles. So I just wanted to, I know I'm going on for a bit, but I just want to open up.
Yes.
And
Could you wrap up, please, Mr. Murtaza?
Yeah, thank you. Over back to you. I'm finished.
Thank you, Mr. Murtaza, for enlightening us on the various issues and also responding to the various other speakers on the matters raised. And also to highlight the issue of national legislation, especially the COVID legislation that has been legislated in many jurisdictions. We are actually running out of time a bit. Sorry to cut you short just now, because we have two more speakers to go.